South Belt going westbound at Redwood Road. It's not going to affect your drive. And traffic lights malfunctioning due to a power outage in Kaysville, 200 North near 2100 West. How do you know if you're getting the best deal on employee benefits? You don't, unless you get free quotes from every insurance company every year. Visit shopmyplan.com to get free quotes. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
KSL weather, pretty warm today, a high of 96 in some areas, and then we'll be climbing to 100 for Thursday. After that, we will have a chance for some thunderstorms that will cool things down for the weekend. Right now, it's 88 degrees and sunny at KSL News Radio, 102.7 FM, 1160 AM, and KSLNewsRadio.com, your all-day companion for news.
Inside Sources. Inside Sources. America's voice of reason. Boyd Matheson on Utah's home for elevated conversation. Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
The headlines continue to focus on indictments, grand juries, congressional hearings, cover-ups, obstruction, lies, and legal justifications. The question beyond the headline for me is, have we come to the point where situational ethics and selective moral outrage have put the country in a tragic tailspin? Let's begin.
Think you know the news of the day? Think again with Boyd Matheson on KSL News Radio.
We are thrilled to have joining us on the program today Cliff Smith. Cliff is a lawyer, former congressional staffer on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., lives in Washington, D.C. as well, where he works on national security-related issues. He's the Washington Project Director at the Middle East Forum and actually joins us today from India. And Cliff, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate it.
Wonderful piece at Deseret.com talking about perspective and really looking at kind of this moral integrity. A lot of folks, when they talk about Watergate, they see that as kind of a low point. You actually start your piece by saying this was actually some pretty high ground in terms of where we are morally. Give us the explanation.
Well, I think in Watergate, you can debate sort of Nixon's position and what he did and what he didn't do a lot. There's a lot of nuance to it. What I think was unequivocally good in Watergate, however, was ultimately Barry Goldwater, who was, his party's, the Republicans' nominee in 1964, went to Nixon and basically said, hey, look, we don't like what you've done. We don't like, what this is doing to the country. And, you can resign to save the country and yourself some problems. But one way or another, you're going because we're not going to support you. And he told Nixon that he himself would be willing to remove him and would do so if it got him to a Senate vote. And that basically was the Republicans, replacing themselves for the good of the country. And that is something I think has gotten lost in recent years. And as I state in my article, I think it's hit a very low point under Donald Trump for reasons that a lot of people might be familiar with. But it really started with Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, while I do not consider his crimes and misdeeds on the same level as we've seen with the issues of Donald Trump trying to overturn the election and some of these other things, they were quite bad, and they were well known and obviously bad. He was clearly abusing his power to have an affair with an intern. Then he perjured himself to cover it up. And what was worse about that, which was in stark contrast to Nixon, was Clinton used his office and his power and, frankly, his despising of the other party to portray himself as a victim, say, oh, look, this is all a vast right-wing conspiracy. This is just about nothing. This is all politics. And basically didn't try to say, oh, I didn't do it, or didn't try to say, anything other than, well, the people you don't like are coming after me, so defend me. And frankly, it worked. His approval rating went up while he was impeached for obstruction of justice and perjury. And that's a really horrifying precedent. And he rallied his party to do the opposite of what Goldwater did. Yeah. And I think that started in a real downturn in public morality.
Let's kind of unpack that just a little bit, just for our listeners, because I think there's so many important lessons in there. We often talk about it in the context of it's easy to yell at your enemies. The real test is when you speak truth to your friends when they're wrong. And that's become increasingly difficult. And I think that was the thing in Watergate. Again, a lot of challenges and a lot of low points in Watergate. But I do think that was a high point when people of the same political party said, no, the good of the country is more important than power in the presidency. and chose to stand up and say that. You mentioned Clinton and where that went to in terms of obstruction of justice and perjury and so on, and then people being unwilling to have that same conversation. And then we've seen that, as you said, continue to spiral to a lot of the things, including many of those that are in religious groups across the country, where again, I still buy into this thing that we've deified our politics and we've politicized our religious spaces. And you point this out in your piece really powerfully in terms of what has happened as everyone in the pursuit of power begins to not speak truth to their friends and just battles their enemies regardless of the issue.
Yeah, I agree. And as I point out in my piece, somebody that was respected in my household growing up was Dr. James Dobson. He was seen as a very smart, thoughtful man of sort of Christian conservative crowd. And I remember I was a teenager at the time, but he wrote a letter in 1998 discussing the moral failings and the legal failings, frankly, of Bill Clinton, and said that, look, accepting this a man is a good leader in spite of, these things is fundamentally incompatible, I believe is the words he used, with the good of the nation. And character matters, and its effect on the public matters. And the funny thing is, I agreed with him then, and I grew up believing that. And years later, when this thing became an issue in my party, I spent years working in Republican politics. Quite frankly, I was shocked to see so few people stand up and say the things that someone, frankly, like Mitt Romney was saying, that, look, this is just beyond the pale. We can't go here. And it was even more shocking to me a few years later when Dr. Dobson, who, in his defense, I guess, is much older and maybe, I don't know, maybe just forgot. But either way, he fell victim to his own prophecy. He predicted that Bill Clinton's quest to justify himself would end in a dynamic where people no longer recognized that which was simply wrong. And the funny thing is he himself fell victim to it. He endorsed Donald Trump, not in a way that he said, look, we're stuck with really bad choices and we really need to wrestle with this. This is complicated. I can respect anybody who makes a different decision, but I've decided to vote for Trump because X, Y, and Z. Even if I wouldn't have agreed, that I could have respected. What I couldn't respect was for him to come out and essentially reverse himself and say, instead of dealing with a man of low character is fundamentally incompatible with the good of the nation, he said, well, Donald Trump's failings are irrelevant character, personality issues. Irrelevant, he called them, 22 years later. And frankly, I think if you didn't know that by, November of 2020, that was a problem, you certainly knew it a month or two later with everything we've seen with trying to overturn the election. And it was sad, really, because he was a man I grew up respecting, and but I can't respect that. I can't respect someone that, basically when his political interests are suited for calling out something that is wrong, he'll do it. And when his interests are not suited, he'll reverse himself without even bothering to mention that he is doing so or pointing out that just the issues he's struggling with. It was just sort of, well, this is what we need to do for power. And
that's
right. The thing is, in my view, anyone that needs power that badly should never have it.
That's exactly right. If you've got to go to that length to get it, I think that goes all the way back to 1789 and George Washington in that first inaugural saying he hoped that the foundations of our national policy will be laid in the pure and immutable principles of private morality. That he called on free government to exemplify those attributes that will make its citizens proud and command the respect of the world. And I think as we look at that kind of public and private morality that Washington called for at the beginning of this nation, that we should expect the same of our leaders, our public servants. It doesn't require them to be perfect. No one is. But it does necessitate integrity and congruency and behavior that will command the respect of the world and make the citizens of the country proud. As we round this out, Cliff, I love where you concluded the piece in terms of this kind of vicious cycle. And again, a lot of it's justification for power or influence's sake. What's the path forward? How do we restore not only that kind of morality to the public square and public service, but how do we make sure that we're doing that regardless of whether someone is red or blue or Republican or Democrat or liberal or conservative?
I think that there is no easy way out. There is no easy fix. There is no quick fix. There is nothing. There is no switch that can be flipped. However, I do think this, and that is, I'll quote the great philosopher Michael Jackson. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make the change. In other words, if you're not willing to do it yourself, to your own side, to your own friends, there's nobody else coming to do it for you. It has to start with people that are willing to look at themselves in the mirror and say, I need to do the hard thing because it's right and because in the long run, doing the right thing is its own reward.
Yeah.
Not, look, can I get away with this for a short-term fix?
That's right.
And I think that kind of thinking, it starts with each person.
That's right.
Each voter, each commentator, each political staffer, each congressman, all the way down, all the way up. I think that's the only way this changes. And I wish I could say it could start, it'll be over tomorrow. It won't be. It won't be over next year. It won't be over probably the next decade. But I do think that people demanding change and people doing small things in small ways and then eventually bigger things in bigger ways will make a difference over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it may not be changed tomorrow, but it can begin today with each of us looking in the mirror and understanding what it means for us to live up to that higher standard. Cliff Smith, lawyer, former congressional staffer in Washington, D.C. He's the Washington Project Director at the Middle East Forum, joining us today from India. Cliff, we appreciate you staying up very late your time. Wonderful piece at Deseret.com, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Very important that private morality, public behavior, being willing to speak truth to power, not just to the other side, but more importantly to your friends. And it is true that changing that conversation, that integrity and moral conversation in the country won't happen overnight, but it can begin today. But it begins with each one of us living up to that higher standard and understanding what that actually means in the public square. And again, going back to George Washington, we really do have to have the principles of private morality, that honesty and integrity, so that we can have people in high places that will make the citizens of this country proud and command the respect of the nation.
Think again on Inside Sources with Boyd Matheson. Soon, this hot summer will give way to shorter days, beautiful colors, sunshine that seems a little dimmer. And before we know it, we're back to school shopping and cheering for our favorite football team. As the season changes, so will the news and weather. And we'll be here to cover it all. Plus, BYU sports coverage and traffic updates to get you to the game on time. KSL News Radio, your year-round companion for news.
Tim Jr. here from RGS Exteriors. And let's face it, it's time to update the look of your home's exterior. When was that thing built? In the 50s, 70s, 90s, the 2000s? Well, it's looking like it. Faded siding, drafty windows, leaky gutters. It's time to take action now. RGS Exteriors has been taking Utah homes from drab to fab for over 5 generations. We only use the highest quality materials, like James Hardie siding and gutter topper gutter covers. You will be blown away by how much different and better and awesome your house can look. Your neighbors will be jealous, your home value will go up, and most of all, you're going to love it. Everything we do comes with our industry-leading 10-year everything guarantee, so you can sleep like a baby, knowing if anything goes wrong, you're 100% covered. For a free estimate on your gutters, windows, siding, or anything on your outside of your home, call RGS Exteriors at 801-280-3110 or visit us at rgsutah.com. That's rgsutah.com.
When words come out of our mouths and everything sounds fine, no one bats an eye. But if things come out a little jumbled or letters sound different than most, there's speech therapy. But did you know that speech therapy is used for more than just stuttering or dysfluency? From articulation to expressive and receptive language to a simple act of swallowing that most of us take for granted, speech therapy can do amazing things for you, your health, and of course your sense of self. That's why Summit Speech Therapy is here. Summit Speech Therapy works with people of all ages, from infants and toddlers who have a difficult time feeding or eating, TBI, stroke, or coma patients, to children and adults with speech problems. So much of it is all related, and Summit Speech Therapy can help. Summit works with all insurance companies as well as private pay options, and the experience can be life-changing. with clinics up and down the Wasatch Front, including Murray, with no long waiting for an appointment. For more, visit summitslp.com. That's summitslp.com.
Any Hour Services can make sure your AC keeps you cool this summer. Whether you need a tune-up, repair, or just a second opinion about replacing it, call Any Hour Services or visit anyhourservices.com.
Dave and Dujanovic.
I hope our listeners take away lots of information, but also a new way of looking at a topic.
Ideas, their thoughts, the things they thought they knew. I hope that gets challenged when they listen to us.
I've had listeners stop me at the grocery store and ask me, what is your show about? And I'll tell them our show is anything from politics to your pocketbook.
Listen for Dave and Dujanovic 9 to noon on KSL News Radio.
With the 3 things you need to know this hour, I'm Britt Johnson. First, unaffiliated voters in Congressional District 2 still have time to affiliate and vote in the Republican primary's special election. Second, Salt Lake City is giving more than $35,000 via grants to help Utahns get access to healthy, fresh food. Third, new data shows crime rates are down this year in some major cities. Right now, it's 88 degrees and sunny in Salt Lake City. Back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Hear elevated conversation on crucial issues. Boyd Matheson on Inside Sources.
Over the weekend, presidential candidates from both the Democratic and Republican side of the aisle attended the Iowa State Fair. Of course, that's a lot of butter cows and fried something or another and a pork chop on a stick. They also spent time pitching their messages to voters there in the Hawkeye State. The governor of Iowa, Kim Reynolds, hosted what she likes to call her fair side chats at the Iowa State Fair, letting those candidates talk to voters, hear their unique perspectives about policy choices and positions they would like to incorporate as they run for the nation's highest office. We want to take a look at what some of those candidates had to say over the weekend, and did it really resonate with those caucus voters that will be very early voters when we get into 2024. Ron DeSantis, of course, campaign has been in reshuffle, relaunch, and reprogramming mode for the last few weeks. He sat down trying to get the reset with the Iowa governor. And as he talked to a crowd of people, he was asked about his economic plan. Here's what he had to say.
Bidenomics is basically Americans have a lower standard of living so that he can pursue his political and ideological agenda. That is unacceptable. You have to have an economy where people work hard, play by the rules, get the most out of their God-given ability, and they can raise a family, buy a home, afford a car, do all those things. If the economy doesn't work for those middle-class families, we are not going to succeed as a country. We got to hold Congress accountable. We can't let them spend us into oblivion anymore. And we need things like a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution and term limits for members of Congress.
So Governor DeSantis laying out quite a list there in terms of things he wants to do on the economic front, in terms of getting spending down, balancing the budget with a balanced budget amendment, term limits for members of Congress. Some of those things that are pretty common there at the Iowa State Fair. Also interesting, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley also spoke with Governor Reynolds. She related the challenges we're facing as a country right now and how they relate to her own family's experience.
My parents came here 50 years ago to an America that was strong and proud and full of opportunities. I want them to know that America again. I'm doing this for my husband, Michael, and his military brothers and sisters. They need to know their sacrifice matters. They need to know that we do love our country. I'm doing this for my daughter who just got married, and I saw how hard it was for her and her husband to buy a home. And now 78% of Americans think their kids won't live as good of a life as we did. We can't be okay with that. I'm not okay with that. We have a country to save.
Yeah, that's Nikki Haley. I think one of her stronger moments over the weekend at the Iowa State Fair. It will be very fascinating. Of course, we have the Republican Party debate coming up on the 23rd of August, and they will all be in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for that. And I think Nikki Haley, you will hear very similar themes to what she just laid out there at the Iowa State Fair will be part of what she has to say coming up in Milwaukee. And the first GOP nomination debate coming up here on the 23rd. Candidate Vivek Ramaswamy also attended the fair, and when he spoke with the Iowa governor, he talked about some of the challenges that we're facing as a country. He talked about the need for not just a slim majority kind of victory, but a landslide election was what people needed and what the young people in particular of the country actually want.
This cannot be a 50.1 election. For so many reasons, it can't. I think we need a moral mandate akin to what Ronald Reagan delivered in 1980. That's what we need. I'm going to be really honest. I think there are other good Republicans in this race who can defeat Joe Biden. It needs to be a landslide. And the difference between 50.1 and a landslide is actually young people in this race. 40% of my 70,000 donors to this campaign are first-time ever donors to the Republican Party in any form, compared to 2% normally. We're bringing young people along with us in droves. And so if you put me in that position as your nominee, it is my duty, my responsibility to bring them along with us in our movement and deliver that landslide election.
Really interesting perspective. I thought that was a fascinating differentiator. A lot of the speeches and conversations you heard over the weekend in Iowa, they start to sound the same after a while. And of course, they're all on the same political side of the aisle, so there's going to be a lot of similarities when it comes to policy. I think what Mr. Ramaswamy did there was have a differentiator. And this is important from a messaging standpoint. Remember, in the face of overwhelming similarity, even slight differences are usually perceived as being more valuable. So I think what Mr. Ramaswamy was trying to do there is say, look, this isn't enough to just talk about taxes, balancing the budget, the national debt, and so on. We have to look at this in terms of a moral mandate. Interesting choice of words there from Ramaswamy. Also saying that, look, some of these other candidates, they could probably win, but they're not going to get a landslide. And the key to the landslide is young people. So a very interesting way. I thought it was a very effective way for Vivek Ramaswamy to actually differentiate himself. And that's a key. When you've got a lot of candidates lining up, even slight differences are usually perceived as more valuable. We'll talk about that a little more as the weeks go on of how do you do that in a very crowded field. Now, the Republicans weren't the only ones in Iowa. Democratic candidate was also there campaigning against incumbent President Joe Biden. Robert Kennedy delivered a speech in front of a very large crowd in the Hawkeye State, and afterwards he took some questions from reporters. Here's how he answered the question, what don't you like about President Joe Biden's presidency?
The censorship, the war, and putting neocons, war-mongering neocons in front of in charge of our foreign policy, and putting Wall Street in charge of our domestic policy and our economy.
So what would you do differently?
I would do everything differently.
So, again, interesting perspective there from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. As he talked about the differences in terms of policy and his differences with the president. He came out over the weekend, called on President Joe Biden to debate him. And that will be an interesting thing. Debates are always a fascinating thing. And, of course, incumbents don't like to debate. Those who don't want to have to defend positions or decisions tend not to debate. And so you try to just stay above the fray there. And so this is one of those interesting moments. Again, you've got Kennedy as a long shot candidate at best. He has at least a protest vote going his way right now, and he's somewhere in that 15 to 20% in terms of polling numbers. But that then raises the question of, is a debate warranted and needed? And can they really have a conversation about the principles and the policies? And that's interesting. I think debating is important. I think it's a great chance to confront the issues, to have crucial conversations, to lean in. Doesn't mean we have to have a big shouting match or a big three-ring circus or a cage match. We can have an elevated conversation. That's what debates are for. And that's how they're supposed to take place. We're supposed to be able to do that in this country. And I think it's an important part of how we go about the process. As long as we do it in a way that is dignified, that is respectful, both of the offices that are being run for, but the people, the voters who will actually cast votes in those elections. We have to treat them with integrity and trust as well. And you do that by elevating the conversation, not avoiding the conversation or using it as a weapon for demonization and division. There's a way to do it, and we should watch for that as voters. How does this particular candidate approach contentious issues? How do they go at disagreement, whether it's with people on their same side of the aisle or the other side of the aisle? And I happen to think watching how people deal with their own, so to speak, is often more telling than how they deal with the opposition. And if you can't stand up to your friends, I'm not sure who you really stand up to when the stakes are really high and the situations are really difficult. So all of that happening at the Iowa State Fair. We know former Vice President Mike Pence was there as well. Tim Scott, Senator from South Carolina, will be there tomorrow. And we'll continue to watch and track what's happening in Iowa. You never knew you would need to know what was happening at the Iowa State Fair, but you do. There's some important conversations going on there that impact all of us as we move into 2024. All right, we'll step aside for some bottom-of-the-hour news. When we come back, much more on Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. Stick around. We'll be right back.
30 at KSL News Radio. I'm Britt Johnson. KSL's top story this hour: triple-digit heat is in the forecast as we head towards the final weeks of summer. State Park spokesman Devin Chavez is reminding everyone to be cautious if you're going to be out on the water.
Ensuring that the safety equipment you do have does properly fit the individual that's going to be wearing it is super important.
This comes after a 3-year-old died at Echo State Park over the weekend after falling out of a boat and getting hit by a propeller. Chavez says the family was taking proper safety precautions and it was a tragic accident. Utah's statewide reservoir storage is at 81%. Last year at this time it was 50%. The Utah Division of Water Resources says diligent water management practices have helped retain our unprecedented snowpack. Our top national story this hour from ABC News. Schools remain closed in Jefferson County, Kentucky, as the district tries to fix bus problems with the school that caused some students not to make it home until 10 p.m. on the first day of school.
Families in Louisville await word on when schools will reopen. Problems with new bus routes caused chaos on the first day last week and led to the cancellation of school Monday and Tuesday and an apology from the superintendent, Dr. Marty Polio.
I know as a dad what that must have been like, how unnerving that must have been, waiting for your child to get home and not knowing exactly where they are or were, and I truly apologize for that.
He said all routes are under review, but the union that represents bus drivers said they've been warning the district that the system was not going to work. Brian Clark, ABC News.
Your money at this moment: the Dow has lost 57 points, but the S&P is up 14 points, and the NASDAQ has also gained 103 points. Coming up, clear skies and warm temperatures. KSL weather is next. KSL News Time, 1:31.
We have enough people running around Broadcast House at 4 in the morning to field a football team.
Producers, reporters, the traffic team, and us.
This is Tim and Amanda.
Join us each morning from 5 to 9 on KSL News Radio.
Hey guys, Alex and Scott for Alpine Home Medical. You've heard us talking about and singing the praises of Alpine Home Medical for years, because if you're talking about getting home medical supplies, these are the folks who are going to do it for you at the best price. They're local. They know how to treat their customers. Scott, we've had a lot of experiences with the folks at Alpine Home Medical over the years.
And they really do know how to treat you, because it can be a scary thing. You go online, you don't know what to get. You're not sure about things. You walk in the store and they're going to take care of you from the minute you get there. You're going to sit down with a professional. They're going to work through your insurance. They're going to get you the right supplies for yourself. I have a CPAP machine. I've been in, I've done this, and they're incredible, but it's not just when you're in the store, it's after you leave. They're going to take care of you, call, make sure everything's just right. These medical devices are important, and you want to feel safe, and you want to feel secure, and you want to feel you got the right thing to take care of yourself.
It's everything, too. The power scooters, the CPAP machines, any home medical supplies, they're going to be able to take care of you. And they've got great news. Brand new store in Tooele. They've been trying to expand to Tooele for years, and then here they are now. Go to alpinehomemedical.com to find a location near you. We're excited to see you out there in Tooele, folks. alpinehomemedical.com.
Yeah, I'm so stressed. Our business is growing. We've got people all over now.
Ooma.
What is that? Meditation?
I'm recommending the Ooma cloud phone system with auto attendant and more than 50 features.
Ooma?
Yep. Switching to Ooma is a cinch. Just $24.95 per month per user, plus taxes and fees.
Ooma.
Now you're feeling it. Find small business calm at ooma.com/radio. That's OOMA.com/radio.
Mr. Clean, Mr. Clean. Of course I use Mr. Clean Magic Eraser to clean tough messes off my stovetop and bathtub. But then I discovered I can also use it to easily clean my patio furniture and even my shoes. I'm hooked.
And when wipes won't cut it, I use Magic Eraser Sheets. They're thin and flexible erasers, perfect for everyday messes, like gunk on my counters and sinks. They really are magical.
The reviews are in. Mr. Clean Magic Eraser and Sheets make cleaning look easy.
Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a haystack, but not with ZipRecruiter. Its powerful technology actively finds and invites qualified candidates to apply to your job. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you the needle in the haystack.
See why 4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. Try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/free. That's ZipRecruiter.com/free.
Traffic and weather together brought to you by Granite Credit Union's High Yield Savings Certificates. Here's Ricky Meese.
Traffic lights malfunctioning due to a power outage in Kaysville. There are some streets restricted around the area of 200 North and approximately 2100 West. Also, a crash called out. This is at Bangerter Highway. This is at northbound I-15 at Bangerter Highway. Give your savings a boost with 5% APY on a 12-month certificate from Cyprus Credit Union. Learn more at cypruscu.com. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
KSL weather, partly sunny skies and highs in the upper 90s for the next few days, possibly getting to 100 by Thursday. We'll still get some cooler temperatures and chances for moisture by the end of the week. Right now it's 88 degrees and sunny at KSL News Radio, 102.7 FM, 1160 AM, and KSLNewsRadio.com, your all-day companion for news.
Inside Sources. Inside Sources. America's voice of reason. Boyd Matheson on Utah's home for elevated conversation. Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Well, during the Cold War, U.S. policy involved the idea of mutually assured destruction, a.k.a. MAD, M-A-D. The idea was that the use of nuclear weapons by one would be used by both, and it's that mutually assured destruction. Today, nuclear war, while still a worry, isn't the only threat facing the country, of course. We're facing many modern threats. And our next guest called these a different kind of MAD, massive attacks of disruption. We want to look at what those are and what our government needs to be prepared to do to deal with those. Harlan Ullman, senior advisor at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C. He's also the author of The Fifth Horseman and the New MAD. Joins us on the line. Harlan, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you.
I loved your piece in The Hill today, talking about how both parties have to learn to govern to deal with these modern existential threats. So just for our listeners, just dig in a little bit where you began with your book, of course, with that mutually assured destruction, now shifting to massive attacks of destruction. Give us the baseline there.
Baseline is this. In addition to state and non-state actors as threats, Russia, China, for example, massive attacks of disruption and destruction are increasingly more important. We went through COVID. More Americans died of COVID than were killed in every single war we fought since 1775. We're looking at environmental disasters in the form of climate change. We've seen what's happened in Hawaii. And so you have a list of 7 disruptors that I identified, the most dangerous of which is failed and failing government. And one of the reasons why our government today has failed and failing is that there has been an increasing lack of legitimacy and therefore trust and confidence that date back to 1964 and the beginning of the Vietnam War, when the Tonkin Gulf was passed almost unanimously by both houses of Congress against an attack that never took place against our destroyers. And from there, situations just declined more, the Vietnam War, Watergate, and then we had the Afghan War after September 11th, we had Iraq, and we have Afghanistan. And all those have proven to be disasters in which what's happened is that in the 60 years since 1964, about 75% of Americans believe government is headed in the wrong direction. 60 years ago, 75% of people believed in government. And the result has been really the responses of both Republicans and Democrats, both parties, in terms of yielding the extreme left and the extreme right. And so now we have the choice of Donald Trump, who in my mind, and I'm a fierce independent, is unfit to hold any office, Joe Biden, who I know and like and respect, who I think is not at the top of his form. And we see government gridlock. We see the Constitution not really working because you need civility and compromise. And what do you see on Capitol Hill? Budget stalemate, inability to deal with all these particular issues. And so unless or until both political parties come to their senses, I'm afraid this country is in a downward spiral, and there are only a few things that might intervene to change that direction.
Yeah, and let's unpack that a little bit. You talk about these threats that are on the horizon. You mentioned climate change, environmental disasters. You also mentioned social media, the national debt, terror, drones. But all of those really seem to come to this central point of this inability to govern. And that's going to be the real key to dealing with any of these issues. So whether it's through the integrity of compromise, whether it's through a different way and a different path to get to real results and solutions. And so dig into that just a little bit for us in terms of what does that mean? You talk about the parties being responsible and saying, hey, we need to do this differently. What else do you see in terms of the way, the path, in terms of trying to move that forward and out of that downward spiral?
Well, it's going to be extremely difficult because it's very, very tough, and it takes time to restore trust and confidence. There are several things that I think that need to be undertaken. First, this country does not have a chief operating officer. Over COVID, we spent $5 or $6 trillion. A great deal of that was wasted. Who was in charge? Who was in charge in the federal government to do anything? And one of the arguments I make is that we need to use the vice president. And unfortunately, in this particular case, I don't think Kamala Harris is necessarily the right one. But the vice president is the only person listed in the Constitution that has responsibilities in Article 1, the legislature, as president of the Senate, and, of course, Article 2, as vice president. And I think it's important that the person who can make the coordination to make government work better has got to be a vice president. And so, therefore, in the future, we would need to choose vice presidents based on the competency and not other political qualifications. Having said that, quite frankly, we're either going to see an economic miracle to grow us out of this problem or a technological breakthrough in several areas. But otherwise, I'm afraid that there's very, very little influence for making the changes that are needed. And if it's Trump versus Biden in 2024, that just makes the situation far, far worse because the election will be one of the most difficult and dangerous in our time, simply because Trump will be fighting legal cases. He's probably going to be indicted for a fourth time. And Biden has got to deal with his age, his vice president, and, of course, Hunter Biden, who may, like Donald Trump, potentially find himself in jail a year from now.
Yeah. I want to dig in a little bit more. We've been talking a lot on this program about the role of the executive branch and the chief executive in particular, the president, also the vice president. I share your view that the most influential way for the vice president to do something meaningful is to go sit in the chair in the United States Senate and play that role and cause the minority leader and the majority leader to just be the floor managers, I think the way it was originally laid out there. And I think that would begin to change that conversation. And so often we've come to this emotive version of presidents in particular. Both parties were equal opportunity offenders here. But I think that notion of having the vice president play that constitutional role, get back to the Senate and do that, to me, it seems that has to be part of an equation, regardless of which political party's in power.
Yeah, in my book, The Fifth Horseman, I come out with a number of other recommendations, but quite frankly, we're in such difficulty. In a sense, Dick Cheney actually did that, and it didn't turn out very, very well. Cheney had an office in the House of Representatives, in fact. But the notion here is you've got to coordinate better, turning this almost into a parliamentary system, because otherwise Congress is just not going to come up with any solutions. We haven't solved immigration. The last time we had an immigration bill was almost 40 years ago.
Yeah.
We've got this huge escalating debt, which is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And quite frankly, we're going to be spending about $5 or $7 trillion over the next couple of years because of the Inflation Reduction Act, chips, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the question is, who's in charge? And how do we prevent a great amount of that being wasted or indeed being put to the right uses so that we can grow our way out of this difficulty? And quite frankly, if the economy prospers, then a lot of these other political issues, I think, will be dulled or dimmed down. So maybe over time we can come to our senses. Yeah. But unfortunately, there's no part of government that's really trusted. Look at the Supreme Court today. The Hill says, one of the articles in Hill says that fewer than 30% of registered American voters trust the Supreme Court. So we're now in a situation, Congress has usually had low ratings, but the presidency now has traditionally low ratings, and the Supreme Court, this is just another symptom of where we are, and now we have to change things. And unfortunately, individuals really don't have the authority or the ability. It's got to be the political parties. And how that's going to happen, I really don't know. But as I said, a first step is let's get a chief operating officer in government who can at least coordinate and oversee the resources we're putting in place so we can try at least to have a growing economy.
Yeah, I think having that kind of trust and that confidence in those institutions, we always say we've stress tested this country under a lot of different things, economic collapse and pandemics and world wars and all of those things. We've never done it in the complete absence of trust, particularly in the institutions. And sadly, that is drifting and unraveling into distrust for our neighbors and within our communities. This is a great book. This is a fascinating conversation. And it's one we want to continue to have because I think this is the essence of where the real debate needs to be. And Harlan Ullman, again, senior advisor at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C., is the author of the book, The Fifth Horseman. It's one you ought to check out and read. It'll get you thinking, and it should get all of us thinking a little bit different in terms of where are we and what is the actual path forward. Harlan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Good to be with you. Thank you very much.
All right, we'll go ahead and step aside for a quick break. Some great perspective there from Harlan Ullman and a lot to think about in there. We'll step aside for a quick break. More Inside Sources coming up next on KSL News Radio.
Soon, this hot summer will give way to shorter days, beautiful colors, sunshine that seems a little dimmer. And before we know it, we're back to school shopping and cheering for our favorite football team. As the season changes, so will the news and weather. And we'll be here to cover it all. Plus, BYU sports coverage and traffic updates to get you to the game on time. KSL News Radio, your year-round companion for news.
Is it time to replace your roof? Intermountain West Contractors can finish most projects in just one day using top-tier quality materials at an affordable price. Visit IWCroofing.com.
What happens if you become too ill to make medical decisions on your own? Set aside time to designate a healthcare representative who can make future medical decisions for you should you become incapacitated. Put those wishes in writing by creating an advance directive. You can find advance directive forms in English and in Spanish at intermountainhealth.org/advance directives or in the Intermountain Patient Portal, My Health Plus, or on the Utah Council on Aging website. Brought to you by Intermountain Health and KSL News Radio.
Hey, Derek Overstreet here from the New Millennium Group, financial advisors in Utah. You know, I've been helping people retire in the state of Utah for the last 20 years. The way we do that is we actually find out what is important to you. We create a step-by-step plan that takes into consideration your income, your debt, whether you want money from real estate, stock market, annuities, life insurance, whatever. If you want to deal with professionals, people that are fiduciaries and have a legal responsibility and obligation to do what's in your best interest, give my team a call at 888-999-6370. That's 888-999-6370. Or go to my website, utahsfinancialplanner.com. If you'd like to retire 3 to 5 years before you thought it was possible, give my team a call right now. 888-999-6370. That's 888-999-6370.
Victor deployed for the first time to Afghanistan in 2003. At 4 in the morning, my phone rang. They said, "I regret to inform you that your husband was wounded in action." Victor sustained a moderate traumatic brain injury. I was doing school full-time, and I was also then caring for Victor. One of the most important elements of caregiving is taking care of yourself. I just didn't want to forget that I also had goals and that I also had a life. What I did is I challenged Victor to meet me halfway. There are almost 6 million military and veteran caregivers across the nation. We have our own journey, and we can fulfill that journey at the same time that we are helping our loved one.
Visit aarp.org/caregiving for a free military veterans guide to navigate your caregiving journey and better care for your loved one and yourself. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Tim and Amanda, Utah's Morning News.
Trust is more important in our business, Tim, than it's ever been in my lifetime, in all of my many years of being here at KSL, because there's so much misinformation out there. And there's so much information that is heavy laden with opinion. When you come to us in the morning, what you get is the news. You get what's happening without a lot of spin or opinion and without any misdirection. That's just the pure, simple thing that you get.
When you talk about the misinformation that's out there, which there is, sometimes those stories just change from one morning to the next. And so hopefully you feel like each day as new information becomes available or we learn new things, this was certainly true during the pandemic, this is the place where we're going to share that information with you and talk about the things that are going to most affect your life.
Wake up with Utah's Morning News with Tim and Amanda between 5 and 9 on KSL News Radio.
COVID-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
Managing today's uncertainty can be overwhelming. We crave security, and it's uncomfortable when we sense a lack of control over our lives. Develop a routine for a more balanced lifestyle with healthy habits and fun. Focus on what you can control, even if it's little things, like a before-bedtime ritual.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
With the 3 things you need to know this hour, I'm Britt Johnson. First, state park officials are warning people to be careful on the water as many are headed to Utah lakes before summer ends. Second, Utah's statewide reservoir storage is at 81%. Last year at this time it was 50%. Third, schools remain closed in Jefferson County, Kentucky as the district tries to fix school bus problems. Right now it's 88 degrees and sunny in Salt Lake City. Back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Get deeper insights on the news from Inside Sources.
Well, Russia is set to export more grain than Ukraine after Vladimir Putin exited the Black Sea grain deal back in July and continues to attack Ukraine's infrastructure as a part of the assault on Ukraine. The news, of course, is a major blow to Ukraine, who's obviously struggling to eke its way forward with a very slow-going counteroffensive against Russia. Someone who's been following this really closely, Ari Hawkins, is a reporter at Politico. He's the author of Morning Trade, Political Pro's daily trade policy newsletter. And Ari, welcome to the show, and a great piece in Politico today talking about how the Kremlin is tightening the squeeze on Ukraine's grain. Give us some perspective on what's happening there.
Sure, and it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Well, like was said, the Kremlin is putting this sort of squeeze on Ukrainian grain. Russia is poised to grab more of that share, according to the USDA's latest report. And one of the reasons why that's so critical is because it gives a little bit of a look into what Russia's sort of longer-term agricultural strategy could be to sort of hammer away against Ukraine. Because the closure or the end of the Black Sea grain deal, for instance, has a significant impact on Ukraine, but it has sort of a broader, spread-out impact across the rest of the world, which will really put the pressure on Ukraine to try to bring back those exports up somehow, make more outreach towards African countries that are going to be more disaffected. And essentially, it makes a situation where as the sort of zero-sum game rises of total grain, Ukraine is really being left to the dust, which could really damage the economy long after this war is ended.
Yeah, I think that's such a crucial component to all of that. And give us a little deeper insight in terms of how this impacts Moscow and this idea that by stepping out of this grain deal that Moscow can actually get back some of the revenue that it was lost by a lot of those sanctions that were imposed early on.
Right, of course. And this is part of that long-term strategy. There isn't going to be an immediate sort of evasion tactic that Moscow can use to sort of push all of this aside. What this does is set up a larger revenue base from which Moscow will be able to draw from really up until it decides to rejoin the deal, which now that this the Black Sea grain deal is dead, Moscow can pretty easily use that as sort of precedent to cement this sort of situation where the Kremlin is able to sort of squeeze out Ukraine's grain. That helps with just higher revenue at large, as we've already seen with Moscow's export and production of that grain rising. It's a very sort of a delicate long-term strategy that sort of shifts the meaning of food as a weapon as more sort of food as a longer-term sort of roadblock that Moscow is very deliberately sort of setting up now.
Yeah, and you also mentioned in your piece just how Moscow's obviously been targeting a lot of the infrastructure components there inside of Ukraine, which again helps them in terms of market share and price. So give us some insight into that, and then how this is actually starting to play out. As you said, it's a long-term thing, but how is it starting to impact global food prices?
Sure, of course. And it's been reported and we've spoken to officials that indicate that this is a deliberate strategy from Moscow to intentionally target these types of exports that, one, connects Ukraine to the rest of the world and also supplies them with various trade-related revenue. The broader impact in terms of global food prices is pretty tricky to determine. In the immediate aftermath of Moscow leaving the deal, food prices ticked up about 1.3%. That's more or less leveled out now, but anytime that there's that type of sort of looming danger, markets just get a little bit anxious, meaning that even if there's not some huge blockade that comes up, the sort of tit for tat that we're seeing on the ground from both Russia and Ukraine attacking each other's infrastructure that's related to agriculture, that situation just becomes a lot more delicate, meaning that it could be a situation where food prices dramatically rise in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, and then let's look at that one step further, just in terms of kind of that ripple effect, and not just in terms of prices, but just in terms of scarcity in some of those places like Africa, other places where there is scarcity, even famine, that rely on Ukrainian wheat and so on. How are we going to see that ripple through in terms of some of these crucial places around the world?
Well, we've already seen higher levels of concern, especially around East Africa. We've seen Vladimir Putin try to make these sort of outreach efforts to kind of make sure that those countries that rely disproportionately on the grain deal that he exited out of are still sort of friendly with Putin. It's sort of impossible to know exactly how he's getting that message across, but we can definitely see that outreach. We just don't know how receptive it will be. It's pretty difficult to sort of predict how this will go in terms of those countries getting that type of access. I would be kind of surprised if Putin is really thinking about that as much as he is focused on anything that could even incrementally impact Ukraine. What the African continent is, and you can sort of see this in certain trade agreements between the U.S. and Kenya that are being talked about, will have to sort of grapple with this sort of broader East-West divide as the sort of so-called geopolitical swing states sort of linger in the air. I think one of the main things from the entire Russian invasion is that sort of broader division where countries sort of on the outskirts of this type of what people refer to as a proxy war really are being drawn into it.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to look at all of that. And you had one other component in the newsletter today that I thought was really interesting and ties in tangentially in terms of what's going on with the grain deal. And that's just trade in general. And you mentioned that China has been one to kind of slam the U.S. in terms of some of the things going on there. How does what's going on in Ukraine with Russia and China weighing in, how does this all impact in terms of World Trade Organization, other things that are happening around the world?
I think one of the largest ramifications at the end of this is going to be that sort of more mainstream distrust of international institutions. We can already see the sort of focus on the WTO and certain institutions where countries either say that their exports aren't being validated or the West isn't doing enough to support certain infrastructure. And I think that type of animosity is really sort of something that can kind of set the stage for further conflict. And that's sort of what we're seeing here now as countries effectively kind of siphon off into individual kind of corners of the world. That has implications on sort of just the flow of produce and exports broadly, particularly for Washington. And it has ramifications in terms of any potential future conflict if we really are seeing a situation where two blocks are sort of diametrically opposed and oriented to kind of fight against each other.
Great perspective. Ari Hawkins, reporter at Politico. He's the author of Morning Trade, Politico's Political Pros Daily Trade Policy Newsletter. Ari, great perspective and insight today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, some great perspective there in terms of what's going on as it relates to Ukrainian grain, the deal with Vladimir Putin and Russia that Vladimir Putin pulled out of in July. The ripple effect, I think, is very significant, and not just in the short term. As Ari pointed out, this is a long-term strategy from Vladimir Putin, and it's one that we have to continue to watch, and it continues to show just how high the stakes are when it comes to what is happening in Ukraine. Well, that's going to round out hour number one for us here on Inside Sources on KSL News Radio. We're going to stay with the Ukraine question after the top of the hour news. The war in Ukraine, many thought might lead to World War III, but it's sure looking a whole lot like World War I. We'll talk about that with Ishan Tharoor from the Washington Post after top of the hour news. Stick around, more Inside Sources coming up next.
KSL FM Midvale, KSL Salt Lake City. Listen on the KSL News Radio app and in your car at 102.7 FM. KSL News Radio, your all-day companion for news.
It's 2 o'clock at KSL News Radio. I'm Britt Johnson. KSL's top story this hour, breaking news on KSL News Radio. A 3-year manhunt for an alleged fake doctor selling an unproven coronavirus cure ended today. Gordon Hunter Peterson is from Cedar Hills, Utah. He's charged with mail fraud, wire fraud, and felony introduction of misbranded drugs to interstate commerce with intent to defraud and mislead. More Americans are pulling money out of their 401k plans to pay for day-to-day expenses. NBMA financial planner Shane Stewart tells Dave Dejanovic this should be a last resort.
Depending on how long you have the money out, what the markets did while that money was out, you could lose quite a bit in lost return, money that wasn't invested and working for you.
Bank of America data shows 36% more people made hardship withdrawals from their 401k accounts in the first 3 months of this year when compared to the same period a year before. Our top national story this hour from ABC News. President Biden telling reporters he may visit wildfire-ravaged Hawaii. ABC's Jay O'Brien has more.
When asked if he planned to travel to Maui to survey wildfire damage, the president telling reporters, quote, "We're looking at it." It comes after he signed a federal disaster declaration last week, freeing up funds for the island. The FEMA administrator also on the ground in Hawaii on Friday, along with a surge of federal resources, including FEMA urban search and rescue teams and cadaver dog crews from California and Washington. Jay O'Brien, ABC News, the White House.
Your money at this moment, a little bit of an uptick. The Dow has gained 26 points. The S&P is in the green 25 points. And the NASDAQ is up 143 points. Coming up, it's a warm start to our week. KSL weather is next. KSL News Time 2:01.
Start your days with knowledgeable, friendly voices telling you about the latest news and weather out there.
Hi, this is Tim Hughes and Amanda Dixon.
In the business of waking you up each morning from 5 to 9.
On KSL News Radio.
I don't have a lot of regrets in my life, but I guess I do regret not having lost this weight sooner. I lost 34 pounds on the SOTA weight loss program at age 59. And better late than never. And today's the right day, because now I'm going to enjoy what life I have left in a much healthier way. But I spent my entire, adult life up until now, 50 pounds overweight, 40 pounds overweight, 30 pounds overweight, up and down, and I never felt healthy. But with the help of the nutritionist who I check in with now in maintenance once a month, I am keeping this weight off.
Here's the thing you need to know, too, about SOTA. It's not one size fits all. They're going to customize a plan that'll work for you, and they'll help you identify not just the foods that are crutches for you, but the times of day that you might be most likely to break through and put a couple of those pounds back on. It's all part of the plan with SOTA weight loss. My daughter just raves about losing 42 pounds and how it has changed her life. They can help you, too. Go to SOTAweightloss.com, spelled SOTA. Think Tim and Amanda. It is state-of-the-art.
Everybody knows that exterior remodeling salespeople are all about the high-pressure sell. Am I right? Windows, siding, gutters, those suckers are going to twist your arm and get you to buy, or they won't leave your house at night. Tim Jr. here from RGS Exteriors, and I want you to know we don't have high-pressure cells. In fact, we don't even have salespeople. Nope, we have estimators. That's a huge difference. Estimators are trained to look at the entire scope of the project. to see and know if there are any problems like rotten wood, wood-borne insects, or construction issues specific to your house or your neighbors. Salespeople are more concerned about playing those silly price games. Buy one, get one free, sign today and get 40% off, as if they didn't just jack the price up to give you a fake discount. RGS Exteriors estimators are going to give you a great quote. No games, no tricks, no nonsense. Call RGS Exteriors to quote your exterior project. Our number is 801-280-3110 or visit us at rgsutah.com. That's rgsutah.com.
Traffic and weather together brought to you by Granite Credit Union's High Yield Savings Certificates. Here's Ricky Meese.
In the Midvale area, we do have an accident involving a couple of vehicles, but one is a tractor trailer. This is southbound I-15, about 7200 south on the shoulder. And for Weber County drivers, a crash northbound at the frontage road, 1900 west at about 40th south. Need tires? Don't buy them without the money-saving Burt Bundle from Burt Brothers Tire and Service. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
KSL weather, some areas reaching 96 today with our mostly sunny skies sticking around for most of the week. We will feel increasing temperatures over the next several days, and then it'll cool down with some scattered thunderstorms for the weekend. Right now, it's 91 degrees and partly sunny at KSL News Radio, 102.7 FM, 1160 AM, and KSLNewsRadio.com, your all-day companion for news.
Inside Sources. Inside Sources. America's voice of reason. Boyd Matheson on Utah's home for elevated conversation. Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
The war in Ukraine is continuing at a very slow slog. Neither side seems to be making meaningful gains, even with counteroffensives and counteroffensives. Some wonder if Ukraine's counteroffensive is happening at all, or if it's a little more smoke and mirrors trying to find a way to get some momentum. The headline, of course, is many people worried at the outset if this would be the beginning of World War III. But beyond the headlines, many military analysts and strategists think that it actually might look a whole lot more like World War I. Let's begin.
Think you know the news of the day? Think again with Boyd Matheson on KSL News Radio.
So the comparisons to World War I are really interesting to me. Ishan Tharoor is an international affairs columnist at The Washington Post. He's also the anchor of Today's Worldview, the Post's daily column and newsletter on global politics. And Ishan, welcome back to the show.
Good to be with you, Boyd.
So let's dive into this. Loved your piece talking about Ukraine's war of attrition that actually looks a lot more like World War I. Explain.
Well, you know, we've been watching this counteroffensive unfurl over the last 2 months. There's been a lot of expectations that the Ukrainians will be able to break through some Russian lines, that they'd be able to score some impressive territorial gains, as they have in other campaigns earlier in the course of this war. But unfortunately, we've seen the conflict really bogged down because the Russians have had time to really fortify their positions across a huge stretch of territory in Ukraine. And you're seeing this pretty grinding, miserable war of attrition, this war where the Ukrainians are navigating minefields and what's called dragon's teeth, as in the Russians have made these barriers of kind of concrete-filled structures that make, passage quite impossible. They've made kind of layers of defense so that if you get over a minefield, then you find yourself bogged down somewhere else and vulnerable to fire from Russian defenders. So it's been really slow going. We don't know. We don't have data, official data on casualty numbers, but we believe, according to my colleagues in Ukraine, that the death tolls are pretty high on both sides. And so there is a discernible sense that this is proving very tough, perhaps tougher than expected, and that morale is flagging, and that we're kind of seeing this meat grinder of a war, which is a phrase both the Russians and Ukrainians use, that's leading to a lot of loss in life and not much progress. And of course, that sort of sense of attrition, that sense of a war for nothing or a war for minimal gain, is recalls very much the agonies and tragedies of World War I.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. I love the way you pointed it out in your piece. Maybe you can walk us through this just a little bit. That even though this is a very modern conflict, the numbers, numbers compared to Iraq or Afghanistan are just so stark and vastly different.
Oh yes, and that specific comparison was from a piece reported in the Wall Street Journal of what we believe there are already in the course of the war. There have been 20 to 50,000 new Ukrainian amputees, as in people who have sustained injuries in combat that required a limb to be cut off. And that is a startling number because you don't see that in modern conflict. The U.S. in all of its conflict, the years spent in Afghanistan and Iraq, only around 2,000 veterans had to undergo amputations. We're seeing a much larger figure already in Ukraine, and that the journal itself pointed out we haven't seen numbers like this since World War I. And that's a pretty grisly, pretty awful, grisly metric. But it does underscore some of the kind of the way in which, yes, this is a war where there are drones flying around. The Ukrainians are using AI to help guide their artillery, the hypersonic missiles being fired. But at the same time, some of the dynamics, many of the dynamics shaping the war are age old, and we've been here before in some senses.
Yeah, and I think that's another interesting thing you get to in your piece, talking about, again, some of those comparisons and even the ability to do some of these things strategically or through the air and through technology. But you also got into this idea that some of this actually looks a little bit more in terms of strategy or strategic atrophy. Explain that for us.
Right. Well, so there's a sense that, so there is a very real debate among military historians, in various policy wonks of various stripes happening in the pages of publications like Foreign Affairs right now, that when they're very, very, very deliberately engaging with looking at the Ukraine war in the context of earlier wars and what other precedents of earlier wars have set. And the debate among some is World War I a useful frame? Is World War II a useful frame? Should we see the difficulties the Ukrainians are facing right now in the context of World War I? And if you raise the World War I analogy, then basically you're saying this is a tactical deadlock. Both sides are kind of canceling each other out. There is a kind of bleakness to this and a no hope to this. Whereas if you think about World War II, especially after the invasion of Normandy and the way the Allies steadily, but in many cases with a degree of difficulty, moved through the Nazi defenses in Normandy in 1944, maybe that's a more hopeful analogy to have, because the Ukrainians themselves, they don't think that this is a no-win cause. They're very invested in this. They are improvising as much as they can to try to counteract the ways in which the Russians have entrenched themselves and fortified their positions. And this is part of the debate. How we want to frame this. Also, what war you pick, what historical scenario you pick, also kind of reflects what your attitude is about the path ahead for the Ukrainians.
Yeah, and as you look at that path ahead, of course, President Zelensky has been known for his great optimism, his hope that he's instilled, the energy that he's infused into the country to defend the homeland and their sovereign territory. With this kind of grinding war, and again, whether it's a World War I or World War II comparison, to me, it's one of those where if it does continue at this very slow slog, we sort of get to that principle of you usually run out of energy before you run out of opportunity. We know President Zelensky fired a lot of the head military recruiters. Give us a sense of where he is, and can he sustain that energy, and what does that mean for the country?
Right. Well, so this is the thing. For a long time we've seen Zelensky as this remarkable wartime leader, somebody who has quite, given that he was not a particularly popular politician before the war, before Russia's full-scale invasion, he suddenly became overnight this really galvanizing figure for the West as a whole. And here he is now. Still, he has from day one said we need more weapons, we need more aid delivered faster to us to help us win this battle, which is for us an existential battle. And his messages remain the same, but you can clearly see in some of his rhetoric and in some of the decisions and moves he's had to make that there's an awareness among the Ukrainians that they are running out of time. That they are feeling the pressures a war that has exacted a really hideous cost on, Ukrainian lives, on, of course, Ukrainian resources. And at the same time, there are new questions about flagging morale in the Ukrainian ranks. And you saw the move last week, as you mentioned, his decision to fire at the head of every single military recruitment center in the country. That's a pretty drastic move, and that reflects an awareness that, there's been a lot of corruption at these military centers. A lot of people are paying bribes to avoid enlistment. And also there's a belief that a lot of the people who've been sent to the front lines have not been sent with the kind of right preparation, that there's the narratives around that are seeping back into Ukrainian society. The Ukrainians themselves have, for months, put forward this show of bravado to the rest of the world. But, we are rallying for our survival, and we believe in what we're doing, and this is such an important fight. But even then, there are cracks emerging in their resolve at home, and Zelensky has to fight against that and do what he can to galvanize his people.
So complicated, so many things. The strategy usually works until the beginning, and every war is about a constantly changing strategy and evolving conditions, and often that mental focus and that mental energy of the nation ends up driving things in the end. Great writing, great reporting, as always. Ishan Tharoor, international affairs columnist at The Washington Post. He's also the anchor of today's Worldview. That's The Washington Post daily column and newsletter on global politics. Ishan, thanks for your perspective today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, as always.
Really good insight there. It is complicated. It is difficult between the fog of war and the challenges of war. And you can see the analogies. Some of these comparisons of it just being a grinding ground game are very reminiscent of World War I, the changing tactics and strategies looking a bit like World War II. But it's really not looking like the modern war many people predicted that it would be. And it shows that all of this is very difficult. And leadership matters. And as we were discussing with Ishan Tharoor from the Washington Post, often in these situations you do run out of energy before you run out of opportunity. And keeping the world galvanized and on side and keeping the Ukrainian people positive and forward-looking is going to be the challenge for President Zelensky in the days ahead.
Think again on Inside Sources with Boyd Matheson. Soon, this hot summer will give way to shorter days, beautiful colors, sunshine that seems a little dimmer. And before we know it, we're back to school shopping and cheering for our favorite football team. As the season changes, so will the news and weather. And we'll be here to cover it all. Plus, BYU sports coverage and traffic updates to get you to the game on time. KSL News Radio, your year-round companion for news.
Yeah, I'm so stressed. Our business is growing. We've got people all over now.
Ooma.
What is that? Meditation?
I'm recommending the Ooma cloud phone system with auto attendant and more than 50 features.
Ooma?
Yep. Switching to Ooma is a cinch. Just $24.95 per month per user, plus taxes and fees.
Ooma.
Now you're feeling it. Find small business calm at ooma.com/radio. That's OOMA.com/radio.
Dad, I don't feel good.
I'll grab the Vicks DayQuil Kids Honey.
Isn't DayQuil just for parents?
Actually, Vicks DayQuil Kids Honey is just for kids, specially designed to treat kids' most bothersome cold symptoms quickly with a honeylicious tasting flavor kids like.
You know what else kids like?
DayQuil Kids Honey first, then video games.
Deal.
Vicks DayQuil Kids Honey. The kids' honeylicious daytime coughing, congestion, stuffy head, stuffy nose medicine. Safe for ages 6+.
Hey guys, are you over 30? Let's talk about testosterone and performance. Your testosterone can decline at an average of 1% to 2% a year after you turn 30. And Revive Men's Health have been experts at treating men with low testosterone and ED since 2011. We're the clinic guys come to when their current treatment isn't working. They have a complicated medical condition, or they're just not happy with their performance. We love what we do and the patients we care for. You can ask our patients. We did, and we have a 99% patient satisfaction rate this year. Our patients even tell us we're more affordable than their insurance deductibles and copays. Let's get to the bottom of your issues and fix them. That's what we do, and we do it really well. Book your T-Check and exam today. Call 801-263-7777. That's 801-263-7777. Or send us a private message at revivemenshealth.com.
Getting help with plumbing repairs is easier than you think. All you have to do is call Any Hour Services or schedule an appointment at anyhourservices.com. No one helps more homeowners than Any Hour Services.
All of us can make small changes that can make a big difference in our lives. I'm Maria Chaleos, and I host a podcast called Let's Get Moving, where I have meaningful conversations with experts on fitness, mental health, nutrition, and more. If you want to see what we've covered so far and stay updated on our future episodes, then follow the podcast on Instagram and Facebook. And make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just look up Let's Get Moving with Maria.
Jeff Kaplan. I'm energized by breaking news. First of all, because it's right now, and second of all, because in many cases the audience needs to know. There's no more important service that we can provide, and I find it critically important to get more details to the audience as quickly as possible. There's nothing more energizing than that for me. Not at all. The most important thing we do is breaking news.
Jeff Kaplan's Afternoon News, 3 to 7 on KSL News Radio.
With the 3 things you need to know this hour, I'm Britt Johnson. First, Bank of America data shows 36% more people made hardship withdrawals from their 401k accounts this year. Second, a 3-year manhunt ended in an arrest today for an alleged fake Utah doctor selling an unproven coronavirus cure. Third, President Biden telling reporters that he may visit fire-ravaged Maui. Right now, it's 91 degrees and partly sunny in Salt Lake City. Back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Hear elevated conversation on crucial issues. Boyd Matheson on Inside Sources.
One of the real challenges as you go through any kind of campaign is the test of having a moment and turning that moment into a movement. That's the real test. Or can you convert a rapid rise into some real sustainable momentum? Well, the latest Republican candidate who has had a little bit of a rapid rise and having a little bit of a moment is Vivek Ramaswamy. Today, later on today, 7 p.m. Mountain Time, hosted by our friends at News Nation, Vivek Ramaswamy will be part of a town hall in Chicago, and the moderator, the host of that event for News Nation is Leland Vittert. Of course, he's the chief Washington anchor for News Nation and friend of the show. And Leland, welcome back, and you got a big night ahead of you tonight.
It's going to be an awful lot of fun. We're excited.
Awesome. And as you begin and as you look at that, obviously Vivek Ramaswamy has had that moment. He's we always say, can you catch lightning in a bottle? And then what do you do with it once you capture it? Give us a sense going into this conversation with Ramaswamy tonight, what you're looking to talk about and what seems to be igniting some of that spark in his campaign.
Ramaswamy is saying things that nobody else is. And he and I were together for a fairly extensive period of time over the weekend at the Iowa State Fair. And I remarked to him that no matter what anybody wants to say about him, he's not running a safe campaign, right? And you see that in his staff that are much more of enablers than they are protectionists, which is very different than virtually any other presidential candidate staff. So this is a different type of candidate, ... Nothing hurts a bad product more than good advertising. Example, Ron DeSantis. Nothing helps a good product more than good advertising. Vivek Ramaswamy, question mark. And by what a question mark means, Ramaswamy is now starting to get real, call it advertising, airtime, whatever you want to call it, right? And now we'll see. Can he break out beyond this seam of support that he has gathered because of some very impressive, online interactions and some very impressive media hits, and obviously his books and everything else, and a guy who, and we have to give credit where credit is due, when he's one-on-one and on the ground in Iowa, he does well with people. Yeah. Can he translate that, and that's what we're going to see tonight, across television into other ways of converting voters?
Yeah, and so dig into that just a little bit for us, Leland. You're a veteran of all of this, and you've seen those that have been the flash in the pans. You've seen those that have taken a moment, and the big test that is really the intriguing one for me is, can he take those 70,000 unique donors, all of the attention he's been getting on social media? Can he put that into an actual campaign, a ground game, a volunteer organization, and turn it into a real serious presidential campaign?
Well, I think he would challenge that this is the premise of your question, that this isn't a serious presidential campaign. And I was with the campaign. They're pretty serious. He spent $15 million of his own money, and it looks and feels and acts like a real campaign, at least from the outside. So I think that perhaps we're not giving him quite enough credit, or we're sort of understating what he's got going on. And he's got real crowds and real people. And when I was at the fair, it was a pretty impressive operation to watch.
Yeah, and so look at it from a sustainability. I think you're right. It is a serious campaign, no question about that. He's garnered that attention. Sustainable, I think, is the question that I'm looking for. Is can he convert it into something that can make it through Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada, and onward?
Well, we'll find out. The longer it goes on, the longer it looks like that's possible, right? And you've studied politics for a long time. Polls are a lagging indicator. They're sort of an evidence of what was really happening maybe a month ago, maybe 3 or 4, 3 weeks ago, of how minds were being changed. So he continues to sort of bump up. Ron DeSantis continues to go down. And look, Ramaswamy makes the point that he, and I think everybody in the Republican field would want this too, but wants it to be one-on-one, a binary choice between him and Trump. And the sooner we get to that point is the sooner we sort of see really how sticky Donald Trump's support is and how loyal it is. And if this 40%, 30, 40, 45% ceiling that everybody talks about existing, whether that's real.
Yeah, so fascinating. I'm going to sneak in one last question because I know you've got to run and get ready for tonight's town hall with Vivek Ramaswamy. Often these campaigns are not just about the great things. He has so many positives going for him in terms of message and energy and youth. Often campaigns get bogged down by a weakness. You called out the Florida governor. He clearly has had some that are pulling him back down. Are there things on the horizon or questions you want to ask him tonight in terms of maybe some of those weak spots that may inhibit that continued rise?
I'm not going to – I don't want to ruin any questions because I think he may be listening. You never know. But I think the biggest point that I would look to is his age. He says it's a strength. The question is it a strength or is it a weakness? And that's something for the voters to decide. And we've got a Gold Star mom on tonight. And this is a man who's asking for the commander-in-chief's job. This is George Washington's job and Teddy Roosevelt and Dwight Eisenhower's job. And the American people have to be convinced that he has what it takes not only to give glib answers and in very thoughtful answers, but he also has to be ready to order America's boys off to war. And they have to trust that he has what it takes and the sort of the depth and the depth and the judgment to do that.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be a really crucial conversation tonight. Leland Vittert is the Chief Washington anchor for News Nation. This will be a town hall in Chicago later tonight, 7 p.m. Mountain Time, hosted by our friends at News Nation, a sit-down with Vivek Ramaswamy, and Leland Vittert will lead that conversation tonight. And that it's going to be really interesting. Can Ramaswamy take that setting of a town hall? As Leland mentioned, they're going to have a Gold Star mom in the audience. Clearly, Ramaswamy is going for the commander-in-chief job. So is he up for that kind of conversation? I think Leland will ask some very pointed, some very personal questions. No gotcha questions. That's not really how Leland rolls. I think he'll be able to lead it to a conversation that I think will be really interesting and give many people across the country an opportunity to look at Vivek Ramaswamy in a little different way. Beyond just the little bits and bytes you get on cable news or things that might be coming down your social media feed. As Leland said, it is a serious campaign. He's put in $15 million of his own money into it. He did have very large crowds in Iowa at the Iowa State Fair over the weekend as he made his appearance there. And he is trying to make this a two-person race. Of course, all the Republicans are trying to make it a two-person race between them and the former president. And I think that will be an interesting part of this test and an interesting part of the discussion. And just to bring it full circle, it's interesting that the rise and fall, and you can go back through any campaign, there's always rise and fall kind of candidates. And it's so interesting to see how that plays out over the course of a complete election cycle. You've seen it on the Republican side, you've seen it on the Democratic side, especially with these large fields that we saw in 2016 and 2020. It's easy to see people kind of get that little moment, but then they weren't able to parlay that moment into a movement. They weren't able to take a rapid rise in the polls or a rapid rise with some good coverage in the media into a real sustained effort that could make it all the way through January, February, March, and April into next year. So we'll continue to watch all of that. Again, tonight on News Nation, you'll be able to see that conversation with Leland Vittert from News Nation and Vivek Ramaswamy, candidate on the Republican side. We'll go ahead and step aside for some bottom-of-the-hour news. We're going to take a look at what is happening in Maui. Maui Strong. We'll get an update on the devastation there and what you can do to make a difference. Stick around. More Inside Sources coming up next on KSL News Radio.
It's 2:30 at KSL News Radio. I'm Britt Johnson. KSL's top story this hour, flash floods are probable in several of the state's parks today, including Zions, Grand Gulch, and Glen Canyon. Senior meteorologist with the National Weather Service, Monica Traffigan, says flash flooding stems from two factors.
A lot of rain over a short amount of time, but the amount of rain that you need for a flash flood depends a lot on the terrain and the type of, whether you've got soil or pavement, things of that nature.
If caught in a flash flood, Traffigan says getting to high ground fast is the best way to survive. She also suggests checking the weather and flash flood potential before going to a national or state park. UDOT says their number one complaint is how hard it is to see the lines, especially during a storm, but that could soon become a thing of the past.
What I expect is for you to be able to see the lanes out there when you're driving, day and night, and regardless of the weather. My expectations are that you will be safer, you will feel safer, and we're going to see less crashes out on our roadways.
UDOT Executive Director Carlos Braceras says they are now connecting a longer white line to a black line, making it easier to see on the light-colored freeway pavement. The first set on I-15 in Utah County is scheduled to be completed by next month. Our top national story this hour from ABC News. The celebrated story of a Tennessee family taking in an impoverished young man who evolved into an NFL player has now led to a lawsuit. ABC's Brian Clark has the details.
Michael Orr was a college football All-American, a first-round NFL draft pick, and a Super Bowl champion. But he's probably best known for his role in The Blind Side, the story of the wealthy Tennessee family who took him into their home and out of a difficult life of poverty. Orr now says that story's a lie. He says Sean and Leanne Toohey tricked him into making them his conservators, alleging they've now made millions off his name and likeness, and he is not. Orr is seeking an accounting of the money, compensation, and an injunction to block them from using his name. The Tooheys have not commented. Brian Clark, ABC News.
Your money at this moment, the Dow in the green 26 points, the S&P also in the green 25 points, and the NASDAQ is up 143 points. Coming up, it's going to get a little warmer. KSL weather is next. KSL News Time, 2:31.
This summer, the political season heats up.
By August, it'll be time for debates. Can you believe it?
We're planning coverage of the real issues, the important stories that impact how we live.
Listen each morning from 5 to 9 on KSL News Radio.
All of us have a role to play in promoting a mental health friendly workplace.
So what can I do to help?
As a CEO, I can set the tone for a supportive culture.
As a manager, I can offer assistance and accommodations.
As a coworker, I can be a source of support.
As someone with a mental health condition, I can ask for what I need to perform my best.
What can I do?
What can I do?
I can remind others that none of us are alone.
And that we all benefit from workplaces that promote good mental health.
Learn more at whatcanyoudocampaign.org.
With the economy the way it is, you're probably staying put. So invest in your home, your number one asset, with beautiful custom replacement windows from Advanced Window Products. They're a local Utah company building beautiful vinyl framed and insulated double pane windows for 37 years right here in Salt Lake City. Advanced Window Products will save you money on your energy bill. Get security features to keep your family safe. And at Advanced Window Products, it's all custom. And the best part? They're local. They build the windows, they install the windows, and they guarantee them for life.
life, so there's no middleman markup. You save on the highest quality windows in Utah, plus Rocky Mountain and Dominion offer rebates. For a limited time, they offer 60-month 0% financing, and right now, get $2,000 off 10 windows or more. They're working 8 weeks out, so make the call now. Advanced Window Products, 801-850-9100. That's 801-850-9100, or visit AdvancedWindowsUSA.com.
Boyd Matheson on the pitfalls of politics. If we want to be an informed news consumer, you have to differentiate between politics and policy. The politics usually is playing to the emotional space. Often we've been conditioned to react inappropriately to anger, fear, frustration, and so on. Policy is always about solutions. You may not agree with it in terms of the path to get there, but that's okay, because you can have a policy discussion based on principles. When you get to the politics, it's more about attacking the other side, demonizing or weaponizing the words of an opponent or someone that you disagree with, or just having contempt that the other side isn't just wrong, but they're wrong and evil. Policy never gets into that space. Policy is, here's a way to get a result. Here's a path to do it. You don't have to agree, but that path is always going to lead you to the best solution.
Join Inside Sources with Boyd Matheson, 1 to 3 on KSL News Radio.
Traffic and weather together brought to you by Granite Credit Union's high-yield savings certificates. I hear that we have emergency traffic, so here's Ricky Meese.
It is emergency traffic on southbound I-15 in Salt Lake County. We had an accident in Midvale at 7200 South, and now I'm looking at a right lane closed and a couple of vehicles over to the left. So all lanes of traffic are squeezing by in two center lanes of travel near 7200 South, and that's what's causing the stop-and-go delays into Murray. Give your savings a boost with 5% APY on a 12-month certificate from Cyprus Credit Union. Learn more at cypruscu.com. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
KSL weather, our forecast looking pretty steady over the next several days, but we're warming up slightly into almost triple digits. We will get some relief at the end of the week as temperatures drop into the 80s with a chance of some storms. Right now it's 91 degrees and sunny at KSL News Radio, 102.7 FM, 1160 AM, and KSLNewsRadio.com, your all-day companion for news.
Email from school about the incident today.
Scary.
You know, teachers like me, parents, we don't always know as much as you guys do about what's going on with other kids.
Half the time, it's rumors.
Yeah, but if you're ever concerned about a friend who's having trouble with alcohol, prescription drugs, anything, you need to tell an adult, someone you know and trust. That can be hard, but speaking up about a problem is what helping a friend is all about.
For more information, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov.
Mom and Dad used to argue about everything, especially about Dad's drinking. My family went from totally crazy to quiet, calm, and even peaceful when Mom started going to Al-Anon family groups. I wanted a better relationship with Dad, so I asked Mom if she would take me to her Al-Anon meetings or to Alateen. I'm sure glad I did. Is someone's drinking troubling you? You might be surprised at what you can learn in an Al-Anon or Alateen family group from people just like you. Call 1-888-4-ALANON or go to alanon.org.
Boyd Matheson divides rage from reason on Inside Sources.
Well, we've all been continuing to watch the wildfires and the devastation on the Isle of Maui in Hawaii, particularly the destruction in the historic town of Lahaina. And we wanted to go on the ground to Maui to get some perspective about what's going on. And just as a reminder as we begin this segment, that you can be part of making a difference. We always talk about that on this show. What can I do today to make a difference? You can go to KSLNewsRadio.com. Just click on Maui Strong. You can be part of the solution and help those in need over there. We're really pleased to have joining us on the line Alex Stone, of course, news correspondent for ABC. He's in Maui reporting on this story. Alex, what's the latest?
Hey there, Boyd. Well, in front of me, there is a line of probably 3 miles of cars, Lahaina residents who are waiting to get a permit to go back in to see what remains. I just came running back to give you a call. I was talking to a carload of a family. Their car reeked of wildfire smoke, and they talked about what it was like getting out with fire everywhere. And now that things have calmed down in Lahaina, they want to get back in, and they want to see what remains of their home. And it is that story over and over again. Another gentleman I talked to, he said they know they lost everything. He snuck in by walking in just to get a bird's eye view from up on a hill to know their neighborhood was obliterated. But now they want to get in and begin sifting through. But it is a delicate process right now because of all the people who were killed and who have not been found yet. And cadaver dogs from Los Angeles County Fire and Rescue arrived last night. They are beginning their work today. Only about 3% of the buildings that burned have been searched. So there's a long road left to go. We know 96 people at least were killed. Most of those were found running away in the streets, that their bodies were in the streets. They had been running away when they were overcome by fire. Now they've got to go in, and they have to figure out how they are going to find the remains of those who were inside homes and the homes that burned. And that's going to be a long process. We've seen it done before in Paradise, California in 2018 when that fire happened, and in other communities as well. This one far surpasses any of those numbers-wise, and they don't know how high the numbers are going to go.
It's so tragic to see all of that unfold. And I wanted to dig into a couple of those things. You talk about the pace and that some of these victims were just literally in the streets trying to run. We know the flames were moving at about a mile a minute. The town was just absolutely overwhelmed. Of course, there's been a lot of growing questions about the emergency tsunami sirens that weren't activated to alert the town to the fire. And I know this isn't the time to dig in on the finger pointing and placing blame and so on, but what's the sense? What's the feel? You mentioned some of those individuals who are anxious to begin that rebuilding process. What else are you feeling on the ground?
Well, there's a mix. Those who were in it will tell you, and I've heard it over and over again here, that this moved so quickly that they don't see how a warning could have come out. EAS would have taken too long. I mean, think about a mile a minute.
Yeah.
And how quick that is. And Lahaina is not that big. It spread through so quickly. And if you set off the tsunami sirens, people are going to run in the streets, which is what they did, and they didn't make it. So would it have made a difference? I don't know. But that debate and investigation is going to go forward. The governor here is saying that they will investigate it. Cell phone service went down immediately. Data service went down immediately because the cell towers burned up. The water piping system melted. There was no water pressure in the hydrants for the firefighters. I mean, it was a chaotic situation. And it's the same thing in Paradise, California, or in Sonoma County, California in 2017 when flames went through Santa Rosa and killed a lot of people, where every time, after the fact, and rightfully so, there are the questions of why weren't there any warnings? But when it is moving that quickly, there is so much chaos and such little time to get out. It seems like a warning never does come, and it's every person for themselves. Not to say that it shouldn't come, but they are going to investigate it. The only option probably would have been the tsunami warning sirens. What would they have done and at what point and how do they activate them? They've got to figure all of that out. Would it have made a difference? They don't know yet.
Yeah. You talk about the delicate next steps. Obviously, still a lot of rescue cadaver dogs and recovery going through there. What are you getting in terms of a sense, in terms of kind of that next step and that beginning of that rebuild process?
They don't know yet. This is still so raw, and resources are coming from the mainland right now. They have just pretty much completed getting the vacationers out. At the airport, it is no longer a refugee center, that evacuation flights from Delta and United and every other airline, that they have been getting people out. I know when we flew in, the captain on our Delta flight gave a pretty moving speech. There were only about 3 of us on the entire plane coming in. And, he said in his 30 years of flying that this is going to be a somber flight today, and that he never thought he would be dreading going into Maui. And he thanked everybody for their official reason to be coming in, and then said, let's go. And then when they landed, they did not overnight here. They did not stop. That crew turned around and flew evacuees right out to L.A. And so they flew the 5 hours over, the 4.5 hours back, and didn't take a break. And that effort has been underway. Now here on the island, except for some who have not left and probably should have on the tourist side since they've been asked to go. It's mainly locals who are now trying to figure out what that next step is going to be. But still, there are so many resources coming in that it's gonna take some time. It's not, again, the wildfires in California or ones around Utah where everything just drives in immediately. Boats ships that are coming full of resources, they're saying that could be a week to 2 weeks to 3 weeks to get here. Military aircraft bringing things in, it's taking a little bit of logistical hurdles to get it here. So it's taking time. And they're a little bit behind where probably you would be on the mainland just to get things in and get organized. But what that next step is going to be, they don't really know.
Alex Stone, fantastic reporting, as always, news correspondent for ABC's in Maui, reporting on the devastation and destruction and the hope that is just part of that human spirit, that resilience that is always amazing to watch. And, Alex, we appreciate your reporting, as always, especially in situations like this. Thanks so much for making time for us today.
Absolutely. Anytime.
All right. Again, that's Alex Stone from ABC. And just a reminder, we have obviously been watching the heartbreaking news coming out of Maui this week, the devastation to the island. The death toll continues to rise, at least 96 dead, many more still unaccounted for. We always talk on this show about what you can do today to make a difference. And Bonneville, of course, parent company KSL, has launched a fundraiser to raise money for the people on Maui. And the Bonneville Foundation, kicked off the fundraiser with $15,000 in donation to the Bonneville Maui Strong Fire Relief. And you can just go to our website, go to kslnewsradio.com, click on the Donate to Help Maui on the website, and you have an opportunity to be part of the solution, part of making a difference as we continue to not only watch and worry and pray for, but this is also a time to start to begin to help in tangible and significant ways. All right, we'll step aside for one last commercial break. When we come back, some final thoughts on Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Jeff Kaplan.
Well, I think it's obvious. My favorite news is what you hear in the minute every afternoon, an expression of what I'm actually energized about on any given day. My minute of news is just a moment to lift you up.
Jeff Kaplan's Afternoon News, 3 to 7 on KSL News Radio.
Hercules Credit Union is always about growing stronger together. They've been doing this since 1946. And they're always trying to help you maximize your money and to make sure you're in a place of financial strength. Right now, you have an opportunity to go for the gold. You can open a checking account at Hercules Credit Union, qualify for gold tier status within the first 90 days, and Hercules Credit Union will deposit $200 into your account. Now, it's not just the $200 that's important. You can also get all the benefits that go with being a gold tier checking member. You get ultimate ID protection, identity theft protection, travel benefits, cellular care coverage, family benefits, and on and on and on it goes, all through our friends at Hercules Credit Union. So go for the gold. Open up a credit checking account today, qualify for gold tier status. They'll deposit $200 into your account after that first 90 days. So check that out today. You can find their locations in Taylorsville, Harriman, Riverton, or Salt Lake City, or as always with our friends at Hercules Credit Union, you can find them online at herculescu.com.
School breakfast is a great way to supercharge a student's day. Each morning, schools offer delicious and nutritious foods tailored to power up both the mind and body for a day filled with successful learning. Consistent morning nutrition, rich in wholesome foods, including dairy, supports cognitive function and concentration, ensuring students are well prepared for a productive day. Every student in our schools has access to this opportunity. Unbottled, a Dairy West brand through the support of local dairy farmers, is working to ensure that nutritious breakfast options remain a staple in our schools. Research has consistently shown a correlation between balanced diets, which include dairy, and academic success. Local farmers, recognizing the importance of this, have generously provided grants to schools, enabling them to enhance their cafeterias. These grants have facilitated the inclusion of options like smoothie stations, aligning with the aim of supporting the overall well-being and cognitive development of our students. This vital message is brought to you by Unbottled, a Dairy West brand.
Emergency traffic on KSL News Radio, brought to you by Granite Credit Union's High Yield Savings Certificates. Right now, we have huge delays southbound I-15 in Salt Lake County. Unusual delays going from Murray into Midvale due to an earlier crash and now lane restrictions that are in place. Only 2 center lanes of traffic are open right now as you're approaching 7200 South. Now, before the afternoon drive sets in, you want to consider avoiding this stretch and use an alternate route until they are able to open up those other lanes of travel. Ricky Meeson, the KSL Traffic Center.
If you own a small to medium-sized business that kept employees on payroll through COVID, you may have a big cash refund waiting for you. The Employee Retention Credit is a tax credit of up to $26,000 per employee. And now, more businesses than ever qualify. The experts at RefundsPro.com specialize in cutting through the red tape of qualifying for this government program. Most of their refunds are over $100,000. Even businesses that have received PPP funds may be eligible. And there are absolutely no fees unless you receive a refund. So there's no reason not to apply. If your business experienced shutdowns, limited capacity, supply chain challenges, or reduced revenue due to COVID, you likely qualify. RefundsPro.com has already helped hundreds of businesses. So don't lose the refund you're owed by missing the deadline. Get started today with a free 5-minute questionnaire at RefundsPro.com. That's refunds with an S, pro.com.
Prices are slashed.
This means hot deals at Dave's Bernina.
At their St. George and Provo locations.
I mean, offers so good we can't tell you the prices, and they won't last long.
Up to 48 months, no interest on certain models.
Come in now for this 3-day event. See the world premiere of the all-new Bernina 790 Pro machine with features you've never seen before, such as a computerized quilting option. Order one now and get a free accessory package worth over $2,400.
Purchase a new Bernina L890
or LH60
and receive all these free gifts,
such as a thread collection and sewing accessories,
Serger suitcase, and the Big Book of Serging. Amazing bargains on previously owned machines while they last that come with warranties.
Starting at $399. So many other hot deals and offers. Come in and take advantage of this sale.
Dave's Bernina, 691 East St. George Boulevard and 2017 North 550 West in Provo.
Dave and Debbie.
Where do people in Utah have an opportunity on a regular basis to voice their opinions? That's on our show on KSL News Radio. You have a way to share your experiences and to get your message out to the entire community. Where else in Utah can they go? Nowhere. That's on our show.
We have to be so careful not to take things out of context. It's very easy to manipulate what someone says to fit your own narrative. And we don't want to do that. We want to take your best argument, you take my best argument, and if we don't always say it perfectly, that's okay. It's a conversation. It's a give and take.
Listeners call the show and are willing to share how they're dealing with life circumstances. This is why our show is so important to this community and why our listeners are so important to KSL News Radio.
Listen for Dave and Dejanovic 9 to noon on KSL News Radio.
Hear elevated conversation on crucial issues. Boyd Matheson on Inside Sources.
Welcome back to Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. It's great to be with you today, as always. I am Boyd Matheson, and over the weekend I had the opportunity to have a conversation with Chuck Todd, a longtime moderator of Meet the Press on Sunday mornings. And that was part of course, Sunday Edition, which airs every Sunday at 9 o'clock in the morning on KSL TV. And I wanted to share with you a couple of bits from my conversation with Chuck Todd because they were really illuminating to me in terms of how he goes about that kind of program and the kind of conversations we should be having in the country. So I asked Chuck Todd about the principles he learned in his 9 years on Meet the Press.
Well, I go back to something that I learned on the very first day after I accepted this posting, and that was some research from viewers. Was the number one reason why they watched a Sunday morning show, and it was to be educated. That was the number one reason. They would say, and it was different ways they would say educated. Well, I want to be able to talk at work. I want to be able to converse on this. I don't have time during the week. But the point was they wanted to learn. And I think sometimes we forget as journalists that our core function in society are teachers. We're teaching people something every day. Maybe it's new information. Maybe it's something they hadn't realized they needed to know. But ultimately, if you, especially when you're in these long positions where you get to have a longer conversation, if you always have your North Star as you're trying to educate the viewer on something that you don't think they fully either know the context of or what it is, but if you always are keeping that as your North Star, which is informing the viewer, not affirming with them, right? Unfortunately, there's a lot of media and our incentive structures. I mean, unfortunately, there's a business incentive to essentially follow the viewer. But of course, if you do that, you end up not informing the viewer.
Yeah, you end up in the ditch for sure. So one of the things I love about the way you approach Meet the Press is the fact that you're a forever learner, you're always curious, so that allows you not only to ask a great first question, but more importantly, the real important follow-up question, which is the real key. And in all those questions and follow-up questions, give me one of those moments or one of those people that really surprised you, where you actually learned something as you were in the context of that discussion.
Well, I point to an early interview I did that was loaded with potential confrontation. And that was the former Vice President Dick Cheney came on the show to defend himself from a report that Dianne Feinstein at the time, who was the head of the Intelligence Committee, was essentially known as the torture report. That wasn't the official name, and certainly people didn't like using that, but it was essentially it, right? What was done during the war in Iraq? What did the CIA do? Did we do waterboarding? Should we have done it? All of that, right? The enhanced interrogation, torture, however you wanted to do it. And Dick Cheney could have gone down what I'd say the Lindsey Graham road and just made it a political back and forth.
Right.
Well, and made it about me asking the question, or somehow the Democrats writing it this way. Dick Cheney came about it, and he believed he was trying to explain his position. And he used, I mean, look, that's what I've always appreciated about the Cheneys in general. I think we've seen it with Liz Cheney, which is, look, they're very, they're not wind, they're not directional wind people, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to just put their finger in the wind. But they will explain to you why they think the way they think.
Yeah.
And what he did is he spent a lot of time on the why. I thought it was going to be this contentious personal thing, and it wasn't. But he also didn't feel like he owed an apology to anybody either.
Yeah, right.
But my point was, it was that kind of interview, which is, I think, what we all want more of on Sunday mornings.
That's part of my conversation with Chuck Todd. Of course, he's been at the helm there at Meet the Press on Sunday mornings for NBC, and has had so many really interesting conversations. I was surprised by his answer on that, talking about a series of questions that surprised him. This conversation he had with Dick Cheney, where he anticipated that the then vice president would be very contentious and make everything political. But instead, he didn't. He just simply explained and went through the process. And I think that's such an important thing, because we've lost that ability to just say, I voted this way, or this is the policy that I put forward, and then just talk about it. Don't turn it into, oh, it's a vast left-wing conspiracy, it's a vast right-wing conspiracy, they're out to get us, and so you got to stand and fight with me. That's not how we move the country forward. And so I love the fact that Chuck Todd, who's been in the middle of plenty a contentious conversation on Meet the Press over the last 9 years, said that those that he appreciated the most were those who didn't go to that space, who were willing to stand up and speak the truth to their friends, not just yell talking points at their enemies. You can hear my entire conversation and watch my entire conversation with Chuck Todd at KSLTV.com. And we'll share a little bit more of this tomorrow as well, because it was really interesting as Chuck Todd ends his 9-year run at Meet the Press coming up at the end of this month. Kristen Welker will take over that seat. He had some really interesting reflections. We talked about the issue of trust in the media. We talked about trust in general in the institutions of government, of media, of business, of community. We also had some interesting things that we bantered about a little bit in terms of what it actually means and what we should be looking for. He actually said if there was one thing that he could do to every website, every news website, every social media website in the country, there was one thing that he thought would change what we focus on. And you'll have to listen tomorrow to find out what that actually is. We'll talk about that tomorrow coming up towards the end of the show. But again, you can see my entire conversation with Chuck Todd from Meet the Press at KSL TV, part of Sunday edition. Of course, that airs every Sunday at 9 a.m., right in between Meet the Press and Music and the Spoken Word. So it's a good way to get your Sunday rolling along. And as we round it out today, I want to go right back to where we started, the conversation at the beginning. And that is, it's one thing to yell talking points at your enemies, but can you speak the truth, even the hard truth, even the uncomfortable truth, to your friends? And for our Harry Potter fans out there, I think it was Dumbledore who said it best. It takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies, but just as much to stand up to our friends. Again, courage is not calling out your enemies. Courage is calling out your friends, especially when they're wrong. Well, that wraps it up